There is a manuscript in the Bodleian Library at Oxford right now. Catalogue number, Manuscript Bruce 74. Handwritten in Ge'ez, the sacred language of ancient Ethiopia. The Scotsman who carried it out of Africa in 1773 was mocked across London as a liar, and he died in 1794 with the label still attached. He was telling the truth. The book he brought back had been missing from the Western world for 1,000 years. According to its pages, 200 beings descended onto a real mountain, taught the human race a list of forbidden skills, and forced heaven to send the flood. The New Testament quotes this book, word for word, as prophecy, and the Bible left it out. What does a book have to say? To be quoted as scripture and removed as a threat. Here is the plan, in order. 1. The two texts, side by side, verse against verse. The quote the New Testament made and the outlawed book it came from. 2. The names. The text lists 20 leaders and assigns each one the exact subject he taught humanity: weapons, sorcery, astrology, writing. 3. The mountain. It is real. It has an elevation. And what stands on its summit today is the strangest detail in this entire story. 4. The man nobody believed, and the chain of graves and caves that proved him right. If that sounds like the history they didn't teach you, the books that never made the official list, subscribe. This is the hidden canon. Now, open the book. Start with the verse that should not exist. Near the end of the New Testament, just before the book of Revelation, sits the Epistle of Jude, 1 chapter, 25 verses. Most readers pass through it in 2 minutes. But in verses 14 and 15, Jude does something no other writer does anywhere in the New Testament. He quotes an outside book with the formula reserved for prophets as the words of a prophet, and scholars agree on the source. The quote comes from the Book of Enoch, the book the Bible does not contain. Listen to both texts. First, Jude, chapter 1, verses 14 and 15 in the King James Version. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Now the book of Enoch itself. Chapter 1, verse 9, in the translation R. Charles published at Oxford. And behold, he cometh with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all, and to destroy all the ungodly, and to convict all flesh of all the works of their ungodliness which they have ungodly committed, and of all the hard things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Read them slowly, one against the other. 10,000s of holy ones, judgment upon all, the ungodly deeds, ungodly committed, the hard words spoken against him. This is not a shared theme between two ancient books. This is the same sentence, not an echo, but a quotation. And notice the credential Jude attaches, the seventh from Adam. Count the generations in Genesis chapter 5. Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared, Enoch, seventh. It is the same title the Book of Enoch claims for its own hero. And Genesis hands this man the strangest exit in the entire Bible. He lives exactly 365 years, one for every day of the solar year. And then, Genesis 5:24, in full. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. No deathbed, no burial, gone. So hold the complete picture for a moment. A letter inside the New Testament quotes, as prophecy, a verse from a book outside the Bible, attributed to a man who never died. That is not a loose thread. That is a missing book announcing itself from inside the canon, which forces the first question: what is the Book of Enoch? And if it was pushed out and forgotten, how does anyone alive today have a copy to read? The book scholars call First Enoch is not a pamphlet. It runs 108 chapters, gathered into 5 distinct books: the Book of the Watchers, chapters 1 through 36, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch. The oldest sections were composed around 300 to 200 BC, in the heart of what historians call the Second Temple period. Academics file the whole work under a heavy label, pseudepigrapha, writings published under the name of a famous ancient figure. Keep that word in mind. It comes back at the end of the story, and it cuts both ways. Now, the strange part. The complete text survives in exactly one language, not Hebrew, not Greek, not Latin. Ge'ez, the classical sacred language of Ethiopia, where the book is called Mäṣḥafä Henok, because one church never let it go. The Canon of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church holds 81 books, 46 in its Old Testament, 35 in its New, and the Book of Enoch sits inside that canon today, not as a curiosity, as scripture read in working churches this year. While Europe forgot the book existed, an entire Christian nation on the Horn of Africa kept copying it, century after century, manuscript after manuscript. For a long time, skeptics had a fair objection to all of this. The oldest Ethiopian manuscript anyone could produce dates from the 15th century, a copy kept at the island monastery of Qumran Gabriel on Lake Tana, catalogued as Lake Tana Manuscript 9. That is roughly 1700 years after the book was supposedly composed. 17 centuries of darkness between the author and the earliest surviving copy. Maybe, the skeptics said, the whole thing was a medieval legend dressed in ancient clothes. Then came the caves. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls pulled from Cave 4 at Qumran were 11 separate manuscripts of Enoch. In Aramaic, catalogued 4 Q201 through 4 Q212. When the scholar J.T. Millick published the official edition at Oxford in 1976, the verdict landed like a hammer. The oldest copy, 4 Q201, was dated by its handwriting to between 200 and 150 BC. And because that copy already carries scribal errors inherited from still earlier manuscripts, the original has to be older, 3rd century BC by most estimates. The Essenes of Qumran were copying Enoch as sacred text 2 centuries before Christ was born. The Ethiopian book was not a medieval fantasy. It was the last complete survivor of something genuinely, provably ancient. The book is real, the book is old, and that is exactly what makes its contents uncomfortable, because the Bible kept a trace of the same story, compressed into 4 verses that read like the wreckage of something larger. Open Genesis, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Right before the flood, with no warning, the text says this: There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Sons of God, daughters of men, giants. 4 verses, 0 explanation. And the narrative hurries on to Noah, as if the editor looked away. It reads like the surviving paragraph of a much longer document. According to the Book of Enoch, that is precisely what it is. Where Genesis spends 4 verses, Enoch spends 11 full chapters, 6 through 16, and it answers everything Genesis leaves blank. Who they were, how many came down, where they landed, what it cost. Chapter 6, verse 2, in Charles's translation. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. Notice the grammar of that sentence. Not a fall, a decision made in committee, and their commander knows it is a crime before anyone moves. The text names him Simjaza, and gives him a line that sounds less like an angel and more like a conspirator demanding accomplices. I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. So they swear an oath, all of them together, so that the guilt cannot be pinned on one. Verse 6 gives the operation its coordinates. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. 2 details in that single verse deserve a pause. First, the number, 200. Not a host of heaven, not many, a head count. Second, the timestamp, in the days of Jared. Jared, according to Genesis chapter 5, is Enoch's own father. The book dates the rebellion to one generation before its narrator. Not deep myth time, living memory. And then the text does something almost no ancient legend bothers to do. It publishes the command roster. Chapter 6, verse 7. And these are the names of their leaders. Semjaza in command, then the officers, name after name. Arakiba, Ramiel, Kokabio, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Armaros. And the roll call keeps going, 20 leaders in all, closed with a military phrase. These are their chiefs of tens, 20 officers, 200 soldiers. A command structure preserved inside a religious book. Legends blur. Lists do not. So ask the question this channel exists to ask. What if chapter 6 was never composed as poetry at all? What if it is written the way a clerk writes an indictment? Names first, charges to follow. Because the charges do follow. Chapter 8 is the charge sheet. It is the part every retelling skips. And it is where this book stops being a story about angels and becomes a story about us. Most retellings say the Watchers taught humanity forbidden secrets and leave it there, vague, safe. The text is neither. Chapter 8 itemizes the crime, teacher by teacher, subject by subject, like the course catalog of a school that should never have opened. So read the syllabus exactly as the book gives it. Teacher 1, Azazel. Chapter 8, verse 1, in full. And Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth, and the art of working them, and bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. Read that list again. Weapons and cosmetics, metallurgy and eye makeup. The same teacher in the same verse hands the human race the sword and the mirror. Whoever wrote this was making an argument. Vanity and violence come from the same workshop. Teacher 2, Semjaza, the commander himself. His subject, verse 3, enchantments and root cuttings. Spellcraft and the knowledge of plants. Which ones cut, which ones cure, which ones kill. Teacher 3, Armaros, the resolving of enchantments. Sit with that one. One teacher sells the curse, another sells the cure, the oldest protection racket in literature. Teacher 4, Barakijal, astrology. Teacher 5, Kokabel, the constellations. Teacher 6, Ezekiel, the knowledge of the clouds, weather, read in advance. Teacher 7, Arakiel, the signs of the earth. Teacher 8, Shamsiel, the signs of the sun. Teacher 9, Sariel, the course of the moon. Look at what subjects 4 through 9 actually are. Astronomy, meteorology, the calendar, navigation by sky and season. In any other ancient document, this list would be called the birth of science. Here, it is filed as evidence for the prosecution. And the catalog is not finished. Chapter 69 in the Book of Parables adds a second roster of leaders, and 2 names from that list almost nobody quotes. The first is Gadriel. According to the text, he showed the children of men all the blows of death, the shield and the coat of mail, and the sword for battle, and all the weapons of death to the children of men. Azazel forged the blade. Gadriel taught where to put it. The book separates the technology of war from the doctrine of war, and gives each one its own fallen instructor. The second name should stop everyone cold. Penemu. His crime, chapter 69, verses 9 and 10. And he instructed mankind in writing with ink and paper. Writing, literacy itself, on the same charge sheet as swords and sorcery. And the text adds a lament. For men were not created for such a purpose, to give confirmation to their good faith with pen and ink. According to this book, human beings were never meant to write things down. Contracts, records, signatures. The verse treats them as a wound. Knowledge was the crime. So run the tally. Metallurgy, weapons, cosmetics, pharmacology, magic and countermagic, astrology, astronomy, meteorology, the doctrine of war, and writing. That is not a list of dark arts. That is a working description of civilization, which forces an uncomfortable question, and it has to be asked as a question. What if that is the point? What if the author looked at his own world, the forges, the armies, the courts, the scribes, and wrote an origin story in which all of it is stolen property? Whatever the answer, the text is explicit about the price, because the watchers did not only teach, they bred, and what they bred began to eat. Chapter 7, verse 2, in Charles's translation, "And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells. 3,000 ells. The number is deliberately monstrous. This is apocalyptic literature, and it speaks in extremes. But what the giants do next is described with cold economic precision. They consume the harvests. And when the food runs out, verse 5, they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. A food chain collapsing upward. Then comes one of the strangest sentences in ancient religion, verse 6. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. Not the victims, not the prophets. The planet itself files the complaint, and heaven answers with what reads like a military operation. Chapter 10. The archangel Raphael receives the first order. Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein. A named prisoner in a named desert. Then the verdict, verse 8, and it may be the most consequential line in the whole book. The whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. To him ascribe all sin. Stop on that sentence. In Genesis, evil enters the world through a serpent and a fruit. In Enoch, evil enters through a teacher. Sin is not eaten, it is taught. Then the archangel Michael receives the second order for the rest of the 200. Bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment. 70 generations, underground, waiting. And only then comes the flood. In Genesis, the flood reads as judgment on human wickedness. In Enoch, it is the final phase of the same operation, not the punishment, the cleanup. The contaminated world is rinsed, and the story of Noah begins on washed ground. One question remains inside the text. What happened to the spirits of the giants when their bodies fell? Chapter 15 answers. And the answer shaped 1,000 years of theology. And now the giants, who are produced from the spirits and flesh, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. According to the Book of Enoch, demons are not fallen angels. They are the dead giants, the spirits of the rebellion's children, locked out of heaven and earth alike. Historians of religion have long pointed out that the demon-haunted worldview of the early Christian centuries grew from precisely this Second Temple soil. And Qumran adds one final, almost surreal footnote. Among the scrolls is another Enochic work, the Book of Giants. Its oldest fragment dated around 100 BC. In it, the giants have names, and one of them is Gilgamesh, the hero of Mesopotamia's greatest epic, drafted into a Jewish apocalypse as one of the monsters. 2 ancient literatures, touching in a cave by the Dead Sea. So far, all of this lives on old parchment. Time to leave the library, because the mountain where the 200 landed is not mythical geography. It has coordinates, an elevation, and tenets. Mount Hermon exists. It is the highest peak of the anti-Lebanon range, 2,814 meters, 9,232 feet, rising over the border between Syria and Lebanon, high enough to hold snow in the Middle East. The verse gave the mountain its own etymology. They called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn upon it. The name, according to the text, is the crime scene's label. And here is the detail no scriptwriter would dare invent. On the summit of Mount Hermon today stands a United Nations position known as Hermon Hotel, the highest permanently manned UN position in the world. Soldiers posted on the peak with optics and radios, doing exactly one job, watching. There are watchers stationed right now on the mountain of the watchers. No conspiracy required. High places that overlook contested ground attract sentries in every century. That is exactly why the symmetry lands. The logic that placed 200 watchers on that summit in the text is the same logic that places blue helmets there today. It is the best place to watch from. Now bring it closer. You. You are using the curriculum right now. There are words on this screen, and you are reading them. That is Penamu's subject. The skill the text says men were not created for. You checked a weather forecast this week. The knowledge of the clouds. Ezekiel's class. You know what day it is because of a calendar built on the course of the moon and the signs of the sun. Serial and Shamsiel. The device in front of you is refined metal. The metals of the earth and the art of working them. Azazel's first lesson. And if you signed anything today, a delivery, a contract, a screen, then in the exact words of the text, you gave confirmation to your good faith with pen and ink. According to the Book of Enoch, you live inside the syllabus. You used 3 of its subjects before breakfast. Every skill on the charge sheet survived the flood that was sent to erase it, and ended up in your pocket. So ask the question the way this text forces us to ask it. What if this book was never really about angels? What if it is about the price of knowing things? Written by people who watched weapons, magic, cosmetics, and contracts reorganize their world, and concluded that this much power could not possibly have been ours by right? The curriculum won, the book lost, and now comes the part of the story where the book starts fighting back, because being pushed out of the Bible turned out to be survivable. The Book of Enoch vanished from the West for roughly 1,000 years. Between late antiquity and the 18th century, Europe knew it only through quotations in the Church Fathers, and through Greek extracts that a Byzantine chronicler named George Syncellus copied into his chronicle around the year 800, a famous book that nobody owned, not destroyed, out of reach. Enter the liar, James Bruce of Kinnaird, Scottish, 6 feet 4 inches tall, and obsessed with the great geographic prize of his century, the source of the Nile. He spent 6 years in Abyssinia, modern Ethiopia, at courts where almost no European had ever stood. And when he came back in 1773, he carried something stranger than a river, 3 complete manuscripts of the Book of Enoch in Ge'ez. He presented one to King Louis XV in Paris in 1773. It rests today in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. He delivered a second to the Bodleian Library at Oxford a year later. The third he kept until his death, and it reached the Bodleian afterward inside a lot of 25 Ethiopian manuscripts the library purchased in 1843, and the scholar August Dillman catalogued in 1848. The key copy is the object this video opened with, Bodleian manuscript, Bruce 74, acquired for Bruce in the Ethiopian town of Adwa. Recent scholarship argues there was even a 4th copy, donated to the Vatican in 1773, and identified in 2018 with the Vatican manuscript Ethiopic 71, a lost book of the Bible recovered in triplicate. London's response? Laughter. When Bruce published his Travels to Discover the Source of the Nile in 1790 in 5 volumes, polite society refused to believe him. They mocked his account of Abyssinians cutting steaks from a living cow. The satirists Horace Walpole and John Wolcott turned him into a punchline. Samuel Johnson, who considered himself the era's authority on Abyssinia, dismissed him. The nickname stuck, the Abyssinian liar. Bruce withdrew to Scotland and died in 1794. His name a synonym for tall tales. In 1821, the Oxford scholar Richard Lawrence sat down with the Bodleian manuscript and produced the first English translation of the Book of Enoch, and the text matched. The book Bruce carried over the mountains of Abyssinia was the same book the Epistle of Jude had quoted 17 centuries earlier. Travelers who followed his route confirmed his geography too. Every story he told had been doubted. The most improbable one was true. The liar brought back scripture, and the book was not done coming back. In the winter of 1886 to 1887, French archaeologists working the necropolis of Akhmim in Egypt opened the sealed grave of a Christian monk. Buried with him was a small parchment codex, 33 leaves, 66 pages. It contained in Greek nearly the whole Book of the Watchers, bound together with the Gospel of Peter, another text the Canon had pushed out. Centuries after the church stopped copying this book, a man chose to take it into his grave. We do not know his name. We do not know why. That codex sits today in the Antiquities Museum of the Bibliotheca Alexandrina. Catalog number BAAM 0522, after a century in Cairo as Papyrus Cairo 10,759. A 4th century papyrus in Dublin, Chester Beatty 12, preserves the book's final chapters in Greek. And in 1952, the caves of Qumran began surrendering the Aramaic originals. Grave by grave, cave by cave, the book reassembled itself. Time to be honest about what the scholarship actually says, because the case against this book is serious, and parts of it are simply right. No academic editor of 1st Enoch believes the patriarch Enoch wrote it. The oldest sections were composed around the 3rd century BC, in a genre, pseudepigrapha, where publishing under the name of an ancient hero was standard practice, not forgery as we mean the word. There is the label from earlier, cutting the other way. It is apocalyptic literature of the Second Temple period, and its catalog of fallen teachers reads, to most scholars, like a Jewish meditation on the weapons, magic, and empires of its own age. And the word in this video's title, banned, deserves its own correction. Search the records, and there is no decree. No ecumenical council ever formally banned the Book of Enoch. What the record shows is a slow closing of doors. Around the year 200, the Christian writer Tertullian was still defending it, arguing that Enoch possesses a testimony in the Apostle Jude, while admitting the book is not received by some because it is not admitted into the Jewish canon either. 2 centuries later, Augustine, in City of God, Book 15, Chapter 23, conceded that Enoch left divine writings cited by Jude and denied them canonical authority. After Augustine, the West simply stopped copying it, not banned by decree but starved of scribes. The skeptics are right about that, and this channel will not pretend otherwise. But the skeptics inherit the same loose end the church did, and it has never been resolved. If the Book of Enoch is a late legend with no authority, then Jude's quotation becomes the problem. The epistle does not borrow a phrase. It names Enoch. It gives his pedigree, the 7th from Adam, and it uses the formula reserved for prophets. Prophesied, saying. A letter inside the canon, vouching for a verse outside it. The early church saw the trap perfectly well. Tertullian said it out loud. There were 2 clean exits, bring the book in, or explain the quote away. The Western church took neither. It kept Jude and dropped his source. And one ancient church looked at the same evidence and made the opposite call. Ethiopia kept both. 81 books, Enoch among them, to this day. Same texts, same quote. 2 opposite verdicts, both still standing after 15 centuries. Nobody has ever closed that gap. Run the timeline one last time. A book composed 23 centuries ago, copied as scripture beside the Dead Sea, quoted as prophecy inside the New Testament, defended around the year 200, demoted in the 5th century, silent in the West for 1,000 years. Carried over the mountains of Abyssinia in 1773 by a man nobody believed. Translated at Oxford in 1821. Lifted from a monk's grave in 1886. Pulled from a desert cave after 1952. And in 2022, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church printed its complete canon in Ge'ez. 81 books. Enoch is still inside. Councils closed. Empires turned over. The book kept arriving. They removed the book. They could not remove the quote. And Enoch is not the only scripture that refused to stay buried. In the deserts of Egypt, a whole library of Gospels lay sealed for 1,600 years. Gospels with names the Bible never mentions. And what they describe is stranger than a flood. Who really rules this world? That book opens next.